I mean, well, Chapo wasn't, I don't know. People paint him as this major leader of the Sinaloa cartel, which he wasn't. He was a member and leader. He was a member in the leadership part of that federation of cartels, which the cartel groups, which is the Sinaloa cartel, is basically a federation of other smaller cartels that are all allied themselves and are based out of Sinaloa. He was arrested and paraded in front of the press as the main guy,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the biggest misconception of him. He's like the head honcho that everyone thinks of him as the boss of the Sinaloa cartel.
Which is, it probably was beneficial for the government at that time in Mexico to parade him out as that, and also for the U.S. government to kind of push their drug war policy as like, oh, look at this success, we just arrested this guy. But nothing changed, drug prices remained stable. There was no, oh no, there's a shortage of cocaine in the United States now because we arrested this major kingpin. Nothing changed. Why was he caught? He was caught because he was, I think, this is my theory. I don't know if it's true or not, but you saw his arrest after his meeting with Sean Penn and Cate del Castillo, who was a Mexican telenovela star, and I think that conversation or whatever was happening at that point, as far as El Chapo's intentions, were to put his story or his narrative out to people and utilizing Hollywood for it. And whatever he was going to say about that was probably not something that people wanted out there. That's my theory. I don't know if it's true or not, but you saw his capture pretty soon after.
So somebody got scared that he was going to put his.
I mean, he was talking to Sean Penn. Hey,
right.
So that's he wasn't arrested by the Mexican military, by the way. That's another misconception about it, which is there was a raid on his some of the safe houses that he was at by the Mexican Marina, the Marines, but he escaped. And he was stopped a few miles away by federal road police. That's who he was arrested by. He was stopped by 2 federal cops near the area where the raid happened. He was with his head bodyguard, covered in mud because they went through some sewer tunnels to get to a road outside. They carjacked somebody and took his car, and then he was stopped by these federal road cops, and then the Marines showed up, right? And so again, narrative is very important in Mexico, and how to construct that narrative as far as who arrested him. So you see the military parade him around. They dress him well and they parade him around, and we arrested him. But there's a lot of stuff that happens down there. The narrative has to be controlled. And who's seen as the victor, who's seen as the guy that the group that is specifically involved in arresting him. It has to be the military, because that is a narrative. So that on the other side of it, there's a lot of narrative influences as far as the cartel and what's happening down there, but it's also the military is also doing its own narrative influence in Mexico.
Who is El Mayo Zambada, and how important is he to the Sinaloa cartel? And what was his relationship with El Chapo?
So what I know about him, and again, I'm a street level guy. I worked on the streets in Baja as an agent, and in a few other parts of the country, but specifically Baja. And what I hear about him comes from people out there working in that field. El Mayo Zambada was somebody that learned his trade craft as far as how to move traffic and figure out drug routes all the way from Colombia up into the United States. He learned his craft in Los Angeles, not in Sinaloa. So a lot of people want to think of the Sinaloa cartel as a Mexican creation and or burgeoning or originating itself in Mexico, but actually started in Los Angeles. So it's a very much an American originated origin story. Through his relationship with somebody that was by marriage linked to him, I think a Cuban national, if I don't misremember about it.
Mm-hmm.
He learned some of the trade secrets as far as getting contacts, learning how to package what distributors in the U.S. to get to, how to work distribution in the U.S. and how to finance and figure these things out. He learned it in L.A. Later on, he went back to Sinaloa and started setting up some of this network from Mexico and started figuring out how to get people involved in it. He's never been arrested. The pictures we have of him are probably almost a decade old now, of an interview he himself had asked for with a magazine called Proceso down in Mexico.
Did you say he asked for it?
Yeah, he asked to be interviewed by somebody from that magazine. He wanted to talk about, some things that were being said about him, I guess. But he's in the shadows. He's a shadowy figure. You don't hear a lot about him.
That's interesting to me that nobody knows about. Most people have never heard his name.
Well, it's I think now a lot of people have heard his name through his son being arrested in the U.S. His son was not arrested in the U.S. He was arrested in Mexico, but extradited to the U.S. And there's a very amazing book written by a reporter, Annabelle Ochoa, I think is her name, that is basically an interview with his son, the son of Mayo Zambada, and his experience in that family and the whole process of how he became involved in that business and how that business is, relates to a lot of the corruption, not only in Mexico, but on the U.S. side. There's this whole story about that, and ask her on. She's somebody to talk to. But yeah, it's an interesting aspect that he's never been arrested and that not a lot of people know about him.
What ended up happening to his son?
I think he turned state witness, I guess. So that's at least what you gather from some of the stuff that he talks about in that book. So he's probably in some sort of protective custody somewhere, probably. But
so his dad wants to kill him.
I don't know.
Jeez.
But yeah, it's interesting that you don't hear a lot about it. And it's there's some aspects of some of these criminal groups down there. Chapo was one of those where I think they turn into some kind of celebrity figures. El Chapo escaped from captivity a few times in a very dramatic way. One of them, he was probably let out by the prison guards.
Mm-hmm.
There's a story about him being in a laundry cart and stuff like that, which again, I think is completely BS, that the government kind of said to not be embarrassed. He was probably let out of that prison. And then the other one was a drug tunnel that was, dug underneath the prison where he's at. And he was kept on the ground level for some insane reason. And if you see the drug tunnel is shaped like that. It's like you see some of the drug tunnels underneath the border that are shaped the same way. So
why are they shaped like that?
It's the quickest way and more the quickest way and the most stabilized way to create a tunnel in a hurry, without having to create a shaft with support beams on it. So you make something that is shaped like that.
Interesting.
And that was probably made by some of the same people that make the tunnels across the border. Is a going theory.
It was wild seeing the video that Vice did on that tunnel. Like there was electricity throughout the whole thing with lights. Like
it was a major operation that cost a lot of money, and all the people that worked in that jail were
they had to have been complicit.
But you can see his celebrity or his almost legendary status kind of build from all these exploits he did.